Jeri Morgan, CEO of Code Blue Computing, and this is our first episode of our Denver Business Owner virtual. This is our virtual town hall, and I'm really excited about this first episode because, as so many of us that are business owners have come to realize over the last week and a half, we kind of went off a cliff, right? And especially as it relates to finances and human resources, we're not really sure kind of where to go and what to turn. So these three folks that I have on with me today, they are Denver powerhouses, and these are kind of my go-to people as far as it relates to financial matters and as it relates to human resources. So I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists today, and then I'm just going to ask you guys to introduce yourself a little bit further so that folks that haven't had an opportunity to meet you yet get to know you a little bit better. Okay, so first on our panelists today, we have Juan Evans, who is a business banker right here in Broomfield. Second on our panel, we have Leon Cerna, who's the president of HR Advantage Group right here in Denver. And then additionally, we have Jessica Gonifas, who is the owner of Silver Peaks Accounting Services. And I think you're based out of Greeley, aren't you, Jessica? Okay, yeah. And I'm going to start with Jessica. Why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your business, Jessica?
Hey there. So I am a CPA. So my firm is a 100% virtual firm. So none of this was really new to us. So we feel blessed that we're in that position going into these challenging times. But we focus on tax, accounting, and outsourced CFO, primarily for law firms and service-based businesses, small businesses. So that's who we support.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Leon, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your business?
Sure. My name is Leon Cerna with HR Advantage Group, and we bring really Fortune 500 services in the HR world to small and medium-sized businesses. We're located, our offices are in Denver. I live up in Broomfield. We serve clients throughout the United States, but primarily here in Denver metro area.
Okay, awesome. And Juan, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, I'm Juan Evans. I'm a business banker here in the Broomfield area. I've been in banking for almost 15 years now. Colorado native. I do focus on small, medium-sized businesses and helping them with their banking and lending needs.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks again. And so I just kind of want to jump right in, you guys, with just some of the things that I've been hearing that businesses are concerned about. And I wanted to start with Leon, really from an HR perspective. What can you share with us about the Families First Coronavirus Response Act that came out that we need to know as business owners?
So the FFCRA, kind of a brief summary of it is that it's effective April 1st. Initially, some of the notifications that came out once it passed was that it was going to be on April 2nd. So it's officially on April 1st. And the intent of it is really to provide employees who have been put in circumstances in one of the 5 or 6 categories. And they are when we've been put in place, essentially the stay-at-home order that has come either through the federal government, the state, or your local area, that we'd get some pay. So there's 2 components of it. There's the emergency paid sick leave, which is EPSL, and the other component is an expansion of FMLA, and they'll call it FMLA Plus. And so those are 2 different types of leaves that are available for employees that employers must now provide. There's some opportunities for some tax benefit for it to help cover, but initially it needs to be advanced by the employer. Recently, I think on Saturday or Friday, it came out with some new language for employers under 50 to provide some relief into certain areas. But ultimately, still, I think there's still a sense of responsibility there. And if you have employees that are working remote, one of the first things that you need to do right away is provide them notification that the act is in place. And there's a simple thing you can download from the DOL directly that will qualify for your notice, and you can just email that out. And once everyone finally gets back to the office, then you put it up with your other posters that you have.
Okay. Now, I've had people say to me, if I have a very small business and I haven't historically offered paid sick leave to my employees, do I now have to do that? Is that something they have to do as a result of this?
Yes, absolutely. There's really no one's exempt from it.
Mhm.
There are some components that we're now going to be exempt for smaller employers,
Right.
but for the most part, the exemptions are really around some of the specifics. And I mentioned there's like 5 reasons as to why someone would be able to be exempt from it.
Right.
But for the most part, those reasons, specifically around school closures and childcare unavailability, if
Mhm.
those two issues are up in the air for a business, because you can't overcome it because it's going to put a halt to your business, you're not going to be able to do it, then you may be able to apply for an exemption. But really, the margins are pretty thin as far as you being able to do it. So you're almost compelled to go forward. But I do encourage you to all look through the exemptions because there's some clarification that just came out for specifically those reasons around school closures or childcare.
Okay. There was another question that came up, and this was specific in the IT space because we're officially designated as an essential employer. Now, what if you have an employee that says, you know what, I've got a family member that has health related issues, and I don't feel comfortable putting ourselves at risk. Now, when you have an employee that has that type of situation, I would assume you have to give them the option to work from remote. You can't just make them go out and put themselves at risk.
Um, yeah, so the number one rule behind both of these, the FFR CRA, is
Right.
that if the employee is unable to work from home or at the office. So
Right.
we know that with the stay at home, everyone has to remove and go back to their homes. And once you're in your home, if we're able to provide them the opportunity to do work,
Right.
then you may be able to avoid having to fall under these two different areas of the expansion FMLA and the paid sick leave.
Okay.
If they're unable to do work because their consumption of time is far greater, then they probably fall into one of those 5 categories, which are again the quarantine, having to do it because you're taking care of someone who has COVID-19, or you're taking care of yourself. That might preclude you from being able to work and be effective. Then you're going to have to apply for the leave, and that's when it's available for you.
Okay. All right. And as it relates to HR, are there any, do you think, changes that will come long term to businesses as some of these things that we're having to implement now, or do you think it's too early to tell?
Well, specifically around the act, there is a commitment that it will not go beyond 12/31. So that
Right.
should end this year. Practices wise, I think we might see more employers provide the opportunity for employees to work from home. And I think this caused a quick panic amongst a lot of organizations to make sure home offices are set up appropriately and that managers are understanding how to best manage those leaves,
Mhm.
or the people being away from the office, and how you handle these meetings and these
Mhm.
conference calls and webinars, and do you have the right software in place.
Right.
So there's definitely some challenges there because we're all used to this face-to-face interaction.
Mhm.
And if you're not having people come in the door, do we need to always be able to meet in person, or could we meet via something like Zoom or Skype or whatever tools you might have? And so that potentially could play itself out, and we have some longer term options available.
hmm I think it's really interesting coming from an IT perspective because over the last couple of weeks, we've been setting up a lot of people to work remotely for companies that historically wouldn't work remotely.
Right.
A lot of your entry level office staff, you typically wouldn't set them up to work remotely. So there's a lot of challenges there, and then there's challenges as far as how you keep that connection. How you keep your company culture kind of intact when we're not meeting in a way that we've typically met before. But I know for me particularly, I've actually found found some benefits in, kind of going to this, meeting more with people virtually than I have in the past, and I've been telling people, I was like, I'm going to incorporate more of, this than I had in the past, because there are some benefits to it. So I think as we emerge from this, there'll be kind of how we did business before and, kind of how we do business after, and hopefully we'll incorporate the best of both.
I think that one thing from a manager standpoint is managers and business owners are a little uncomfortable. Like, is Juan really working, or is he at the beach? Is he really at the beach, or is he really working?
Is Juan really working?
Back here, I got my surfboard over here.
So, there's a lot of organizations that use, Teams is one, Google, of course, where you can show your availability. And I think I've been hearing from a lot of our own clients and friends of mine of wondering whether or not they're able to look and see if someone's available. They don't have to see them physically, in their office space, but just being able to see if they're available or not available. Are they working? Because if they're showing available, then that means that they're working, not doing laundry, not watching a show, not hanging out at the beach. And I think that's some of the getting used to that we have to adjust to.
Right. Okay, perfect. Now I'm going to pop on over to Jessica. So there's a lot for us as business owners. There's a lot for us to unpack tax-wise, budgeting-wise, funding-wise, in this CARES Act that passed. From your perspective as a CPA, what are kind of some of the the most important things in general as business owners that are important for us to know from your perspective from some of those things that passed last week?
I've been advising all of my clients really to kind of look at a 6-month planning window. So we don't know how long this is going to last. I really hope that it doesn't last 6 months. But really starting at the foundation and, how much do you have in resources? So, and when I say resources, I mean not only your cash, but also available credit on business credit cards or lines of credit. So really looking at the full picture of what your resources are, and also calculating what your fixed costs are going to be, so on a monthly basis. And when you take those two things into account, you're going to be able to see how long you can operate. And really, I'm telling my clients to pull it back to zero revenue. So I know that's not where everyone would be at, but for me, that's the worst case scenario. And then they'll get a good understanding of what resources they have and how long they can operate. Then we start looking at how are we going to fill a gap if we have a gap, and what strategy will we start pulling, pieces out of our toolkit to start filling the gap if we have it. So I think one of the things that's been hard for the professionals, and I know it's 10 times harder for all of you guys out there, is the stuff is coming down so fast and it has a lot of room for interpretation, and there's some conflicting information. So we're doing the best we can to advise our clients really of the ways to kind of start looking at this stuff. So, a week ago, we just had the SBA loans, the regular disaster loans. So we had a lot of folks going out there applying for those. Now this week, we now have these emergency SBA loan with the payroll protection piece in it. So those are two different programs, and they have kind of two different goals. They have different qualifications. The other second piece I'm really advising my clients to is, any of these government programs, I have a lot of experience with them. When they first come out, oh, this is great. This payroll protection, you can get $10,000 within 3 days of applying or being accepted. There are always lots of documentation requirements, and your financials have to be really, I would say, pretty impeccable. Because if these pieces do transition into grants, they are going to want to see every single piece of that to ensure it was spent in the way it should have been spent. So a couple things right now, really just plan for the next 6 months and see where your gaps are. and to make sure your financials are just in really great shape and everything is just really, really clean. And then start kind of working with your financial professional, banker, whoever that is, to unpack them and see which ones make the most sense. So huge variance in the SBA loan programs. The disaster program requires for the small businesses the personal guarantee of the owners. This second piece that came out in the CARES Act does not require that. So those are big pieces, huge differences between the two programs that may really affect which one you wanted to be in.
And then do you know, can people participate in both? Is that an option?
Juan, you might have a little more
Right.
on this. I thought you could, they had said you could refinance. So if you got into the first one and wanted to roll it. But then I was reading the payroll protection and it was saying you can't apply if you already applied for something for similar use. So I'm not, that's unclear to me still.
Right. You know, and it's so interesting. I've talked to a lot of my clients over the last week, and the thing that I've been talking to people about is, like, as a business owner, you always plan for a dip in the economy, but you don't plan for, you know, the brakes to hit and for you to kind of go flying through the windshield of your own business, because so many businesses, they went from, you know, $100,000 a month, you know, $50,000 a month, whatever it was, to nothing, you know, and that's you know, that is something that you would never plan for. And even as a CPA, I mean, is that something that you know, ever as you're kind of working with clients, you think maybe, okay, as long as you have 6 months, you know, planned out, you know, you should be good. But with something like this, we literally have no idea how long it's going to last.
Exactly. We usually say the bare minimum is 3 months of operating reserves. Like to have 6, and then almost always have a line of credit in your back pocket in case something happens. So
now, Jessica, when you hit something like this, how do you make sound financial decisions when you're kind of in the middle of, you know, of a crisis like this? Like, what are some things that you're helping your clients do to kind of stay centered and make sure that they're making good decisions, and not, you know, if they don't need to apply for these loans, then maybe don't. You know, what are some of the things we should be thinking about?
I think the first, I mean, I always say don't panic, right? And that's
Right?
so hard. I mean, I'm a small business owner, so we're all
Yeah.
in it. But I think really looking at your numbers and grounding yourself in where am I? And, you know, what are the resources I have and how long can I go? And then looking at, you know, that sort of 6-month kind of cash flow piece. Ground yourself there, then you're going to really know where your gaps are. And then I'm working with several of my clients now to let's just hold for a minute and see what the options are. Now, the disaster assistance that came out from the SBA a couple weeks ago, that piece you can apply and then you can decline it if you get a month down the road and it's not accepted and it's not going to, you know, fit for you. So at that point we were saying, you know, if you have a month of operations and you really think the brakes are on it, get in the program and see how that plays out for you. So it's really just picking off. And when we're talking about small business, especially the sole proprietors and those sorts of things, we also have to look at your personal resources. And so really a piece of advice I would have is really be transparent with your financial professional about what the situation is. So, because as sole proprietors, our business is us, right? And a lot of times our own personal credit score is going to come into play if we're looking for financing.
Right.
And so if your CPA is helping you with this process, we really need to know what resources you have on both sides.
And then would you recommend that really any business owner should be working kind of in conjunction with both their CPA and their business bank CPA and their business banker as far as looking at all these programs and these options before they do anything right now?
I would.
Okay.
I know my clients that have existing lines of credit, I've said, hey, call your banker. Let's see where they're at. And so I think it's important we have them in the conversation, and especially now that the CARES piece that came out last week, that comes directly through the banks instead of from SBA. So, we need to have them involved. We also need to be talking to them about mortgage payments. So there's so many things out there. I mean, even Facebook has a small business grant program right now. So
Do they really?
Yeah. So there's so many resources. You just need to be talking to people that are in it, and can help you sort through what's going to work. I mean, now the early withdrawal penalty on 401ks have been suspended. And then you can pay the tax on that over a few years. So there's so many places to be looking that I think you have to have a team really behind you right now to get us through this.
Right. Now, I had one last question for you, and I was just kind of this morning going through some of the bullet points that came out over the weekend, and I saw a piece that was related to if people had business losses over like the last 4 years, that they could somehow be utilizing that. Did you see anything on that, or kind of know anything about that?
I think I saw that in draft form. I have not looked at that. So I can't speak to that right now.
No, and I just noticed there's a lot, as someone that this is not my area at all. And, there were so many pieces in there. And on the one hand, as a business owner, I really appreciate that, on whatever level they're trying, to help smaller, businesses kind of get through this time. But again, like there's so much information in there. I don't even know how, one person would unpack it. And as I'm talking to you guys, one person wouldn't unpack it. Like there's pieces that relate to you and there's pieces that relate to Juan, and just kind of, having your team, kind of power through that information. Now, Juan, I'm gonna pop over to you. Now, I want you to talk to me a little bit about as much information as you know about this paycheck protection program that came through on Friday. From what I understand, the information is still coming out on that, and people should be able to apply for that starting this week. What do you know about that?
So far, we haven't received any application from the government yet. And the bankers, we're waiting for that to come down to us.
Okay.
Talking to some of my other colleagues in other financial institutions, they're in the same boat. Still haven't seen anything come down yet. We're scrambling to try and find the best process for that. But I guess my first piece of advice is to contact your banker and let them know your current situation. Right. Gather your financials, talk to your CPA, make sure everything is buttoned up, like Jessica said, so that when you do hand over your financial package, it's the best information that they can have to shift through it so that they can get you at least approved through this streamlined process. Since this payment paycheck protection is run through the financial institution itself versus the SBA, and it's backed by the SBA.
Okay. Now, as far as when you're talking to your clients and they're kind of trying to figure out what they should be looking at from a funding perspective, kind of how do you help your clients ascertain as to whether they should be looking at getting a line of credit through the bank, or if they should be looking at government options, or if they should be looking at all the options? How do you kind of help people, work through that process?
I guess we need to see what kind of financial situation that they're in. I'm looking at everything. Right. Do they have enough in reserves? Do they have cash? What can we use as collateral if we need to? Does it make sense to go for a line of credit and just have that on hand so when they need to dip into it down the road, we can look at that? Is it an existing loan that we have with us right now? Do we need to maybe take a look at change in terms and maybe extend those payments out further?
Right.
We can take a look at that. Most financial institutions are willing to take a look at each applicant on each client or member that they have and go through to see what their best options is if they need to make a change in terms. And like I said, if it is a term loan, go out an extra 6 months and tack it down on the back end. We can apply for the SBA at that point. If they need, the paycheck protection, get that applied for it and get the additional $10,000 right up front if we can do that. I guess everybody's going to be different. There is no cookie cutter solution.
Right. Now, what can we do as business owners right now? Because I know for you guys are probably getting inundated with calls, and I'm sure Jessica to some degree is as well. What can we do as business owners? Like, kind of, what should we have in place, or what should we have figured out before we call the bank?
Financially, where do you stand? Can you make it 3 months, 6 months? What does that look like for you down the road? If everything halts, how if it were to stop tomorrow, how good would you be for the next 3 months?
Right.
And then we can look at that. If you're still producing, you're still earning that paycheck, maybe we do look at that line of credit to help you through the next 6 months, keep your people employed and products still going out the door, keeping the lights on, that kind of thing. Definitely have your financials in order. You can get your books right.
Right.
So that when it does come to that, you can pass it off to your lender and we can the best picture available.
Right. Now, have you seen any evidence that kind of lending has tightened up as a result of this? Like, are people concerned about lending, like banks in particular? Are they getting concerned about lending to folks without knowing how long this patch is?
I would say we maybe have tightened up a little bit when it comes to guidelines. I've seen some institutions have an unsecured line of credit and it was say up to $100,000 and maybe they back down to 50, but we'll look at different cases. I guess they're not going to be as lenient as they used to be, but definitely take a look to make sure that the business is going to be strong enough to make a payment down the road.
Right. Okay, perfect. And then I have a question in the chat that I think was for Leon, and I think it was as it related to the less than 50 employee level on the having to pay to pay sick leave. I think a friend of mine, Hunter, was asking if that was exempted kind of for smaller companies, and we talked about that a little bit, and that's kind of in that paperwork that we can download, correct?
Yeah, there was two questions. One was, what does the
Mhm.
notice look like?
Right.
That's one they gave from Hunter, and I shared
Right.
the link to the DOL site.
Perfect.
There's two notices on there. One's for federal employees, and one's for all non-federal employees. Most of us who are on this call probably are going to do the non-federal. That's the one I shared.
Right.
The follow-up question was regarding, it was my understanding that employers with less than 50 employees were exempt from the sick pay requirement. That is not true, but they may apply for an exemption. The way the current language reads, but this just came out on Saturday, is that employers with less than 50 employees may claim an exemption of FMLA Plus and the emergency protection sick leave for only reason 5. And reason 5 is the one that applies for childcare or schooling.
Okay.
If those two, there's certain criteria that must be met, and you can find that criteria, and then you have to apply and provide them information to see if you fall and be able to be exempt. And basically, they both center around it's going to be a financial hardship on the organization, or you possibly don't have enough staff to be able to do the work. And if those criteria are met and you got to have the person at work, then you'd be exempt from it. But ideally, I think what we've been trying to encourage most of our clients and even friends is find a way for them to be able to work from home if at all possible.
Right.
And that's going to be your best opportunity to be able to try to balance this all out.
Okay, perfect. And then Jessica, I was going to ask you, and this may be something that you may or may not have the information on yet, but I know that there were a bunch of tax credits that were supposed to come through as it relates to like payroll and employee tax credits for keeping folks kind of employed through this patch. Do you have any information on that you'd be able to share today? Like I said, I know so much of this is just coming out kind of as we're speaking.
As far as I know, that was related to the FMLA and the sick
Gotcha.
leave stuff. And you can apply that towards your Social Security, the share of
Mhm.
Social Security. But it's shows up on your quarterly tax filing.
Mhm.
And if you have overpaid, because you're supposed to be paying that every month or every pay period, it cannot be refunded, but it can be applied in the future. So my perspective on that is it's great, but it's not going to help you today necessarily, because
Right.
you still have to make those tax payments.
Mhm.
So that's what I've seen, but I have not read the 800 page.
Okay. Right? Your bedtime reading. Your bedtime reading.
What have I
with
been
the,
doing?
Right? I know, and it's so interesting to me, just like these different pieces that keep coming out, as part of the different programs. And the thing that really kind of resonates with me is, as we've gone through the last couple of weeks, is that there's so many like micro and very, very small businesses in our country that are kind of, that are kind of weaved through our communities, and that employ folks, but in general it's harder for them to kind of keep, to have that 6 month to 12 month cushion. And so when something like this happens, it really hurts, a lot of the smaller businesses. Like as we go forward for businesses like that, do you recommend them kind of, because a lot of smaller businesses, they don't sit down with their CPA until it's tax time. Maybe they sit down with them once a year, right? And maybe going forward, to do more planning with your CPA, and maybe using your CPA as more of a of a CFO for for small businesses. Because I just know, just in my Facebook feed, the number of people that are really struggling right now, just 2 weeks in, to try and stay open is really hard. So going forward, what are some of the things that people could look at, or conversations that they could have with their CPA to try and get themselves in a better financial position for when these types of things happen?
Yeah, I think it's just that reserve piece, the line of credit piece.
Right.
It's sort of that whole emergency management, risk planning
Right.
for yourself financially. So, I mean, even personally, we should have a few months of expenses in our savings accounts.
Right.
So I think it's sort of that whole financial planning piece. One thing to add is the payroll protection piece does have a provision for sole proprietors, and just like I'm the owner and I give myself a little paycheck. So keep that in mind. If you're just by yourself, you don't have employees, they did put provisions in there for you as well. So,
Okay.
But one other thing I think is really important is, I think we're all in sort of a fear reactionary mode, which is totally normal.
Right.
But we have to remember, if we're looking at any sort of borrowing or, loans or anything like that, our business has to be able to sustain those payments when we're back up and running. So I'm sure Juan loves to hear this. So we don't want to put ourselves in any position that we're getting a loan that's going to get us through the next couple months, but then our business can't even support that when we're back up normal. So that's the other piece I'm talking to my clients about is, is this going to be something we can sustain in the future, even after we're through this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then Juan, I thought I had heard on some of these programs, and what Jessica's saying is absolutely true. But I'd heard on some of these that there might be an ability to defer payments for like 6 to 12 months. Have you heard anything on that?
I have heard that for about 6 to 12 months.
Right.
The loan forgiveness piece of it, that all depends. Again, it's going to be an individual basis, but it's like an 8-week period after the origination of the loan to determine, what could be forgiven. And different uses for that loan can come to use for payroll support, such as salaries, paid sick leave, medical leave, insurance premiums, mortgage, rent, utility payments. So all that can be built into this loan. And it started, I guess, the loan period, what's covered right now is from February 15th and ending June 30th. And that establishes the loan amount for what you need through the end of December 31st. So they'll work that out. Is there another part to that question?
No, I think that was it. And when I heard this, the only thing that kind of struck with me about it is because we don't know kind of what time frame we're looking at. It's like, okay, it could be deferred for 6 months, but we could be at home for 6 months. So it's one of those things that like Jessica was saying, it's kind of balancing between keeping your business going right now and and having a plan for when you emerge on the other side, to not have bills that you're not sure how you're going to pay for then either. Now, Leon, I was going to ask you, I know a lot of times smaller businesses in particular kind of do their HR themselves, which is difficult. What are kind of some some things that you might be able to tell us from an HR perspective that when we run into these situations that we're looking at a crisis for the business and we have staff, kind of what are some things that we should look at additionally, other than trying to keep an eye out for governmental changes that have come down the pike as well?
Yeah, I mean, we always try to do a lot of things ourselves. A lot of
Right.
smaller business owners do. A lot of homeowners do. We try to do our lawn, we try to clean our house, and then you get to a certain point, you want other things to get done by the people.
Mm-hmm.
Likewise, fixing your car, sometimes you might leave that up to someone else. And so when things get too complicated and you're going moving beyond just putting in windshield wipers, and I'm speaking for myself,
Right.
even that can get complicated. You got to go to a resource that someone who has a greater level of expertise. Your people best,
Mm-hmm.
so that plays a big part in it. But talking to an HR professional is really just like talking to, a tax professional or a loan specialist or a financial specialist like our other panelists here.
Right.
Is important to make sure you're navigating through some of these items as carefully as possible, taking advantage of the tax credits that might be available for you. And the FFCRA has it. I just posted it back up on for everyone to be able to see that as well. So make sure that you understand it, but don't be afraid to reach out to an HR pro and get some help to navigate some of those things. The biggest thing that I've been hearing is that a lot of smaller businesses are concerned that their employees are going to be taking advantage of the situation by not working from home, and then the employer be compelled to have to pay them just to sit at home and catch up on that Tiger show that everybody seems to be watching on Netflix. And that in and of itself becomes, concern for a small business where, time is money. And as it is, everyone is, running on a thin budget, and we're afraid of what's going to happen. And we just fell off the cliff, and we want to make sure that we catch ourselves some point. And so when somebody or key members aren't available, it becomes a little bit scary. So, trust your employees, talk to them, be open about the situation. I had a client of ours run into a little bit of a risk where one of their employees got sick, and they took a very conservative approach. Even though it wasn't COVID, they decided to shut down the whole office earlier than required to, do a thorough cleaning and keep people at home, and made it work.
Right. Yeah, and even a couple of weeks ago, even though we fall under that essential category, we knew for us the right thing for us to do at the time was close the office, move everybody remote, and we only go on site for an actual emergency until we kind of get on the other side of this. And I think a lot of times, if you take that perspective with your employees, and is that whole thing that we're all in this together, and if you're taking that approach with your employees, and to some degree the folks that work for us, we have to have some level of trust for them in those positions, or they're not in the right role if you don't.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And you'll find that most of your employees, especially in small business, I grew up in a small business with my family, and you get very connected, and they become your extended part of your own family. You have more than 5 or 10 or even 2, and so everyone's really committed. And if you give them the opportunity, and you're erring on the side of caution, you're erring on the side of doing what's right by them, ultimately that usually comes back and helps you and them in the long run, and ultimately everyone will benefit from it.
Right. Absolutely. Okay, so I have a question that came up from Teen in the chat, and she was kind of asking as it relates to solopreneurs. Does this assistance help with their own personal payroll for folks that it's just them and their business? And I don't necessarily know on that. I don't know if Jessica or Juan has any information as far as for folks that the business is just themselves, if they can do any of those PPP programs to keep like their own payroll going.
It doesn't include sole proprietors.
I pasted a piece in there. So what is considered compensation for a sole proprietor? It can be a wage. So if you're an S corporation, you should be taking W-2 wage, or net earnings from self-employment. So that is going to be a great question to talk over with your banker and your CPA. But it's what is income to you doesn't really matter what you're using it for, but the way your income is calculated. So I think it was huge that they included a provision like this in here.
Okay, awesome. All right, now it looks like we've answered all the questions. We're gonna wrap things up in a minute. For each of my panelists, was there anything that you wanted to share today that we didn't hit on that you think is important that we talk about, or did we kind of hit on what you were hoping we were gonna just share with people today?
I would say, just from a lending standpoint, just be patient with your bankers. They are being bombarded with phone calls. As this information comes out, we're learning just as much as you are, trying to disseminate what we need to. But there is going to be a waiting list for applications to be approved. But just be patient. They will get to you, and we'll get it all taken care of. Okay.
Perfect. All right. And then Jessica, Leon, did you guys have anything to add?
Not here.
Okay. All right, perfect. All right, so what I'm gonna do, and see you guys, because I'm working from home, and my son just came flying in like that viral video from last year when the baby went flying across the back. Hang on one second. So what I'm gonna do, friends, is I'm going to, for everybody that was here with us on the webinar today, if it's okay with you guys, I was so close. I even sent my husband for a drive with the kids while we were on this, but all right, just wave it, friends. All right, so, sorry guys. So if it's okay with the 3 of you, I'm going to include contact information for the 3 of you for anybody that was on the webinar today, just in case they have any questions. Is that okay with each of you?
Yep.
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, I've got a Power Ranger behind me, so I'm gonna go ahead I'm going to go ahead and thank each of you so much for joining me today, for working with me. And I have twins, so it was only one that came in, so it went really well on the webinar today. But so I'm going to let each of you go, and thank you so much. Like I said, each of you are kind of like my go-to as far as information for my business, and I appreciate you kind of taking time to chat with us in, while we all are so busy helping our own respective clients. So I do appreciate it so much, and you guys have a great week, and I will talk to you soon. Okay.
Thanks.
All right.